Hey, what's up? It's Cute What If. This side. Today we will be seeing what if Deku gained Shockwave's power. Before we move ahead with the FIC, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for future what ifs like this. Izuku Midoriya, alias Shockwave, is the #1 vigilante of Japan. He maintains a complex web of relations. He considers Megatron and his mother Izuku Midoriya among those he trusts, and views Shockwave the predecessor with respect. He holds a neutral stance toward Optimus Prime, All Might, the Autobots, and the general people of the MHA world. His enemies include Starscream, the High Council from Robots in Disguise, various Decepticons and Autobots who pursue him for different reasons, and the LOV. Shockwave's strengths are a genius-level intellect and proficiency in martial arts such as Wing Chun and Jiu-Jitsu. His weaknesses stem from being only one combatant, vulnerable to being overwhelmed, and an eye that, if damaged, can render him blind. He prefers a logical, methodical approach to heroism and dislikes those he sees as petty or reckless. His weapons include a Techvolt emitter, a hyperflux cannon, and a stun baton capable of emitting electrical charges to pacify stubborn foes. His primary ability is Shockwave, or Thunderblast, which he can regulate for size and intensity and use like a sonar pulse to determine surroundings. In human form as Shockwave, Izuku's hair adopts black with purple highlights, his eyes become heterochromatic with a controllable purple right eye and a red and black left eye, and his clothing shifts to purple, black, and silver. As a robot, he can change from human size to full Cybertronian height in an instant, retaining the red optic typical of his predecessor. He is a triple changer, able to assume a tank form and a Cybertronian jet mode. On Cybertron, Starscream reacted to Megatron's survival with ecstatic reverence, praising the Allspark and declaring their master alive. Megatron acknowledged Starscream but responded in a tone distant and changed, explaining that he now understood the true meaning of oppression and had lost the taste for inflicting it. Optimus registered shock at the transformation in Megatron, recognizing the brother he had once known and sensing the finality of the change. Starscream, ever obsequious, attempted to coax Megatron back into his old role, suggesting rest and a return to familiar hot places. Megatron instead rejected that proposal and announced the end of the Decepticons as they had been. He then transformed and departed, determined to leave those ambitions behind. A lone Decepticon with a single eye and a hyperflux cannon observed the scene from afar. The witness felt an unfamiliar shame and remorse, turned away in silence, and returned to a lab to consider what to do next. Later, in a Cybertronian prison, guards realized that a prisoner had already made use of a transport filled with science equipment, foiling their efforts to secure him for transport. The guards blamed Shockwave for anticipating their moves. In the transport cockpit, Shockwave sat damaged and sparking after fighting off guards who had tried to apprehend him. Several of those guards lay incapacitated nearby. His frame bore signs of battle and leaking energon had crept into tiny crevices, but he had escaped and was still operational. While drifting in orbit above Cybertron and taking a final look at the planet, Shockwave reflected that remaining on a world governed by a council no better than the one he had once tried to overthrow had been illogical. He concluded that finding another planet with sufficient energon would be the most practical way to ensure his continued operation and survival. He transformed and departed, setting course for new territory and unknown challenges ahead. Shockwave decided to scan for suitable planets while keeping his former comrades and Autobot pursuers at bay. He scanned many universes and set a hyperjump to a promising planet. The moment he engaged the drive, the ship known as the Eye vanished into hyperspace. Back on Cybertron, the Warden demanded to know how Shockwave had escaped. One guard suggested that Shockwave must have planned an escape as soon as he was apprehended, while the other began to explain a possible tracking method. The Warden cut them off in fury and ordered that the Decepticon be brought back by any means necessary. He stormed away, leaving the two soldiers shaken. One guard asked if they had the coordinates for where Shockwave disappeared. The other replied that Shockwave had erased the travelogue history, but suggested he might have neglected to check himself before they attached a tracking beacon. Unbeknownst to Shockwave, a small but powerful tracking chip had been concealed beneath his frame. Eventually, the eye arrived at Earth. The planet appeared repaired and largely intact. Shockwave assumed he could blend in with the locals as he had on a previous world, but closer inspection revealed a striking difference. Many humans on this Earth possessed abilities called quirks that altered society and technology. Shockwave recorded in his audio log that this Earth was likely a parallel world, where roughly 80% of the population had quirks and 20% did not. He noted that those without quirks were often marginalized, ridiculed, or exploited, and that the quirks had affected technological progress by shifting priorities away from innovation. Alarms on the eye sounded and a menacing warship appeared in pursuit. Shockwave immediately recognized the vessel and received a transmission ordering him to choose between returning to the Decepticons to be reformed or facing death as a traitor in the name of Starscream. Shockwave calculated that returning offered no safety. Starscream would only use him for vengeance. He refused to betray Megatron and insisted he would not go back, arguing that the war was over and it was logical to move on. The warship declared it would execute him as a traitor. The warship opened fire. Shockwave piloted the eye with skill, dodging as best he could, but the enemy's firepower overwhelmed simple maneuvers. He targeted the warship's critical systems with the eye's weapons, scoring a decisive hit that destroyed the pursuing ship. The explosion expanded in an anime-style blast that threw the eye into the warship's shockwave. The eye took severe damage, systems sparked and hydraulics ruptured, and Shockwave was tossed from the cockpit into the ship's bay. Structural damage caused faster deterioration than before, and his emergency repairs were only partially effective. Realizing he could not remain in orbit, he set coordinates for a forced landing and aimed for the closest safe location. The eye made an emergency descent to the outskirts of a city in Japan called Muzutafu, where fate had unexpected plans. Izuku Midoriya, age 4, thought about the word quirkless and what it meant. To him it marked separation from everyone else. Having a quirk divided the haves from the have-nots, and he found himself among the latter. Friends turned on friends. His childhood friend Katsuki, whom he called Kachan, used explosive powers to dominate and intimidate others. Day after day, the torment increased until one afternoon Izuku ran into the forest in tears after being hurt. He wondered again why he had not been given a quirk, why the gap between those with and without powers had widened so much, and how he could ever become a hero people could look up to when his life felt so small. His thoughts were interrupted by a flaming object crashing nearby. He ducked into a ditch for cover. When the noise subsided, he emerged and saw a literal spaceship that had come down hard. Its design was alien and it bore fresh battle damage. Curiosity overcame caution. Izuku found a small opening and crawled inside. The interior looked like it had been through combat very recently. Hoping for some twist of fate, he pressed on and discovered a door larger than any back home. He imagined whatever lay beyond would be bigger and more powerful than All Might. He steeled himself and approached. The door opened as soon as he reached it. 4-year-old Izuku looked around the wrecked ship, noticing tools strewn across the floor and wondering how it had happened. A voice identified itself as Shockwave and remarked that it had not expected the first being to see it to be a human, much less a juvenile. Izuku asked who the voice belonged to. Shockwave announced his name and Izuku asked what had happened to him, noting that Shockwave looked as if he had been through a terrible fight. Shockwave confirmed the assessment and explained that this was not the first time. Shockwave recounted the Great War that had torn apart Cybertron, how a galactic-level threat had nearly destroyed his world, and how his former leader had disbanded the Decepticons and gone into exile. He described deciding to pursue more logical, peaceful experiments after the war, only to be captured and held as a prisoner. He had escaped and vowed not to return to Cybertron after discovering that the new post-war council had not improved. He then described the earlier battle above Earth's atmosphere and how an explosion had severely damaged his ship, the Eye, and himself. By the time Shockwave finished, Izuku was thrilled at the story. Izuku asked if Shockwave would stay and what he intended to do now, pointing out that the ship and its pilot were in no condition to keep flying and that returning home was no longer a realistic option. Shockwave agreed that was a logical assessment but added that the trouble following him ran deeper. While the Autobots might want to capture him and take him back to Cybertron, his former comrades who shared his insignia would prefer to see him permanently disabled for refusing to join their conquests. Izuku examined data on the ship's computer and noted that Shockwave had been collecting information about the planet, especially about those with and without quirks. Izuku sympathized, comparing how some on Cybertron had been treated to how quirkless people were treated on his world. Izuku asked whether Shockwave had planned to abduct or experiment on humans. Shockwave clarified that his kind did not consume matter the way humans did and that he had no intention of abducting or probing anyone. He had meant only to document from a distance and live out his exile quietly. When Shockwave asked why Izuku felt sympathy, Izuku explained how the world revolved around quirks and how he had been assigned to the 20% considered quirkless, ridiculed and ostracized by people he had once called friends. Shockwave listened solemnly and observed that despite the light years between them, they were not so different. Shockwave attempted to rise but pain forced him down to both knees. Izuku hurried over and noted that Shockwave's injuries were worsening and that he needed medical help. Shockwave told Izuku that his injuries were too severe to repair and that his own time was limited, but Izuku's was not. He reminded Izuku of his desire to become a hero and pointed out that without a quirk it was difficult. Shockwave explained that he had equipment capable of helping, but it came with a price. The procedure would integrate Shockwave's CNA into Izuku, making him half Cybertronian. By Shockwave's calculations, Izuku would retain his human form and be able to transform at will, but the exact outcome could not be guaranteed. The process would be irreversible. Shockwave asked if Izuku accepted. After a few minutes of thought, Izuku resolved to proceed and agreed. Shockwave instructed Izuku to remove his protective clothing and step into a chamber. Izuku did so slowly at first, then steadied himself and entered. Shockwave warned that once the procedure began there would be no return to being a normal human and that it could not be stopped. Izuku affirmed his choice and asked Shockwave to share his knowledge as well, reasoning that there might be other dormant machines like the Eye on Earth and that the know-how could be useful in the future. Shockwave considered the request reasonable and agreed. Shockwave started the machine, provided a sample of his CNA, and the system scanned the life form inside the chamber. When the machine confirmed readiness, Shockwave announced the commencement of the evolution. A silvery blue liquid metal enveloped Izuku. The first contact brought intense pain that felt like an all-consuming fire, but the pain gradually eased and a new sensation took its place: power. Izuku began to change inside the tube, adopting many features reminiscent of his donor Shockwave: an angular purple frame, a broad chest plate, and wings forming along his back. When the process completed, Shockwave opened the chamber. The sight that met him was astonishing, and the moment marked the beginning of a new path for Izuku. Izuku had been transformed from an average quirkless human into something that defied science in his world. Shockwave asked Izuku how he felt. Izuku told Shockwave that he felt power and that he knew he had the ability to change the world and show others how narrow their perspectives were. Shockwave responded that this was good and that they needed to proceed with their plans, but the conversation was cut short when alarms blared. Shockwave walked over to a monitor and saw Decepticons closing in, a mere 5 minutes out. Shockwave warned Izuku that their time was up and that he must leave before it was too late. Izuku refused, insisting he would not abandon Shockwave after all the help he had received. Shockwave told him he would have his chance to repay the favor in time, but not here and not now. This fight was something Izuku could not handle in his current state, and it would be Shockwave's to finish. Izuku thanked Shockwave for everything. Izuku collected the clothes he had taken off, instinctively transformed into flight mode, and launched off at supersonic speed. Shockwave looked at his successor and told him to go forth, to become what he had always wanted to be and what Shockwave himself could not. 5 seconds later, 5 Decepticons burst through the doors with weapons drawn. Shockwave identified them as the infamous combat icons Onslaught, Blastoff, Vortex, Brawl, and Swindle. Onslaught demanded that Shockwave surrender and come quietly, promising to give Starscream a reason to spare him. Shockwave noted, with cool logic, that Starscream must be desperate to send 5 bots for him, and he refused to comply. Brawl issued one last demand for Shockwave to come with them. Shockwave declared that he had already made his decision. He would rather be one with the Allspark than betray anyone, even Megatron. He asked if any of them had considered what would happen when Starscream no longer needed them, or what they would do next. Brawl lost patience and insisted Shockwave would die where he stood. Shockwave invited them to try. On cue, internal defenses that Shockwave had rerouted activated and stunned the combat icons. Starscream's voice came through Onslaught's wrist communicator, demanding a report and asking if they had located Shockwave. Shockwave replied that the combat icons were in no condition to answer, much less fight. Starscream was incredulous, but Shockwave said that was irrelevant and delivered a message instead. He accused Starscream of being the cause of their persecution and of the betrayals that had followed, and warned that Starscream would one day be cast out to face his end. He promised that the reckoning would not be immediate or delivered by him, but it would come. Starscream listened, helpless and furious. Shockwave then turned to the combat icons and accused them of selling him out for quick profit and leaving him to die. He told them he would return the favor by taking all 5 with him. Shockwave moved to a console and activated the self-destruct sequence. He proclaimed the old motto as the countdown began. A brief electronic beep was followed by an immense explosion that consumed the area. Starscream screamed in anger as Shockwave's final act detonated the facility and the combat icons with it. The blast was depicted as a massive, unambiguous end rather than a graphic scene. 10 years later, after the Autobots defeated Cyclonus and his team, Izuku reflected on the decades since his encounter with Shockwave. He had trained and honed his abilities relentlessly. By day he maintained the facade of a quirkless student, but by night he practiced in secluded locations. A lot could be accomplished in 10 years with dedication. He discovered that he possessed a Techvolt emitter and a hyperflux cannon, and an ability he called Shockwave, which he suspected had inspired his predecessor's name. He learned to combine those weapons with his inherent skills to produce potent effects, electrical attacks from the Techvolt, grappling hooks that could stun, EMP blasts, and the hyperflux cannon's wide, controlled discharge. He found it logical to cap the cannon's effective radius at 15 meters so as not to overload his systems or cause unnecessary destruction. During his free time at school, he read extensively about how things worked. Thanks to Shockwave's instruction, complex scientific concepts came easily to him. Of course, that knowledge attracted attention he had not fully anticipated. As a third-year high school student, he sat in class while the teacher discussed career aptitude tests, though the teacher remarked he already knew what most of the students wanted to be. Izuku joined in the conversation but was mocked again. Katsuki even burned the notes Izuku had been taking. Izuku later retrieved them from a fish pond in the afternoon and scowled at the damage before moving on. Later, he walked under a bridge with the sludge villain trailing behind him. Izuku sensed the villain closing in and used Shockwave's voice to warn him that it was ill-advised to pick on an unsuspecting victim, especially someone like him. In that moment, Izuku underwent a striking transformation. His hair shifted to purple, his eyes took on 2 different colors with one becoming purple and the other red, and the corneas darkened, signaling the activation of his latent power. He turned to the sludge villain, his right arm already forming into a hyperflux cannon, and spoke in the coldest tone, accusing the other of having no interest in letting an attempted murderer simply take his life and move on to ruin someone else's. The sludge villain stared at Izuku in complete shock. Izuku fired the cannon and felt a sharp impact where he had been struck, but the villain's form closed over the blast and quickly regained full strength. Izuku then swapped his hyperflux cannon for the Techvolt emitter and unleashed a surge of electricity. The villain convulsed under the charge, then faltered as the electrical overload toppled him. Izuku reverted to his original appearance and continued his trek. The sludge villain was defeated as quickly as he had appeared. A familiar figure then emerged and surprised Izuku, All Might. All Might approached, took in the scene of an unconscious villain and a visibly shaken third-year high school boy, and asked the young man what had happened. Izuku explained that he had been nearly killed before someone had intervened and delivered a powerful shock to the villain. All Might asked whether Izuku had been able to see the rescuer's face, and Izuku admitted he had nearly blacked out before he could. All Might thanked him, secured the villain in a containment bottle, and left Izuku to continue his walk. Izuku reflected that his decision to lie had been risky but necessary to maintain appearances in front of the symbol of peace. Fortunately, there had been no cameras under the bridge. He told himself to be more cautious going forward and pondered his next course of action. In a nearby alley, the sludge villain slowly regained consciousness. Inside the bottle and wondered where he was and what had happened. He recalled being blasted by the cannon and then overwhelmed by a second weapon. The villain muttered that, if the kid had not had those devices, he would have escaped the town long ago, and wondered where the boy had found such weapons. A group of boys walked by with Katsuki at the front, talking about the roughness of the day and how he and Midoriya had been friends when they were younger. Katsuki blamed Midoriya for getting in his way and demonstrated his disdain by striking a soda can. The strike unscrewed the cap and, unknown to him, released the trapped sludge villain. Katsuki declared that someone needed to teach what he called the worthless nerd a lesson about how the world really worked, then crushed the can with his quirk and tossed it aside. His friends laughed and suggested going to the arcade to unwind or sneaking into a nearby bar. Katsuki protested that getting caught would ruin his chances at UA. One of the boys then noticed something unusual. The sludge villain revealed himself and commented approvingly on the fiery energy he sensed. Across the city, All Might stood in his weakened form and reflected on the burden of being the symbol of peace. He thought about how a terrifying incident years ago had shaken the public and how a later confrontation had left him with severe injuries that limited how long he could remain in his powered form each day. He worried that when his time ran out, everyone would become vulnerable. He had helped to cover up particularly dangerous fights to prevent panic, keeping a smile that calmed the public even as he hid his own fears. Checking his pockets, All Might realized the villain was gone. A distant explosion confirmed his fear. The sludge villain had escaped custody. On the street where the earlier fight had taken place, Izuku watched as the sludge villain seized Katsuki and took him hostage. This was the same villain who had nearly killed Izuku the previous day. He watched the hero known as Death Arms charge with valor only to be deflected back into a wall. The other heroes tried to assist but were forced back as quickly as they came. Izuku decided that adding his input and revealing himself from the shadows was the only logical choice. He slipped into a dark alley where there were no cameras and began his transformation. His hair shifted to a vivid purple, his signature eyes taking form, and he suited up for battle as Shockwave. Shockwave braced himself to make a statement in the most logical way possible. Katsuki struggled with all his strength against the gelatinous bonds but only made the sludge villain more ecstatic. The sludge villain gloated that with Katsuki's quirk at his disposal, not even the greatest heroes could stop him. Empty Lady rushed in to help but was blocked by the cramped space between buildings. The sludge villain laughed maniacally while the onlookers and heroes felt helpless until 4 thunderous shots from a hyperflux cannon struck the supervillain and dislodged Katsuki from his prison. Everyone looked up in disbelief. A figure stood over 6 feet tall, clad in purple armor with a single red eye on his helmet, the hyperflux cannon still humming in his left hand. Heroes and civilians alike were stunned, and even Katsuki was dumbfounded. The sludge villain, however, stared in horror. The armored figure dropped from above with a heavy thud that made the ground shudder. He advanced toward the sludge villain with deliberate, menacing footsteps. He reminded the villain that he had failed to learn lessons from their last encounter and introduced himself as Shockwave. The sludge villain recognized him and lashed out with rage, accusing the newcomer of being a brat he had met under a bridge earlier. Shockwave coldly confirmed his identity and warned the villain that he had lost any reason to continue his rampage. The battle erupted. The sludge villain hurled nearby objects while Shockwave returned fire. Larger chunks of debris flew through the streets. Shockwave dodged with practiced agility, but some of the debris struck civilians. Several people were hurt, some more seriously than others, and emergency responders began tending to the wounded and transporting the most affected to hospitals. Shockwave observed that the villain's attacks were predictable. The sludge villain improvised by swinging poles, and Shockwave parried with stun batons. The clash turned into a test of strength. For a moment it seemed the sludge villain had the upper hand, but Shockwave activated the stun feature on his batons, delivering a shock that forced the villain to fall back. The sludge villain reveled in Shockwave's power, fantasizing about controlling such strength and settling old scores. Shockwave dismissed the villain's rambling, warned that revenge was an illogical path, and vowed to use every means at his command to stop the threat. The villain charged again. Shockwave attempted a counterattack with his Techvolt emitter, but the sludge villain dodged and used debris to bulldoze through the crowd and into the city. Several civilians were knocked down and injured during the rampage, some required hospitalization. Shockwave transformed into tank mode and pursued the villain as the crowd and heroes watched in disbelief. Downtown Mizudafu became the stage for a destructive chase. The sludge villain rampaged through the streets while Shockwave fired his weapons and adapted his tactics. The villain taunted Shockwave about not knowing when to give up. Shockwave replied that he could continue as long as necessary to stop the threat. When the villain extended tendrils, Shockwave blasted them with the hyperflux cannon. In a final desperate act, the sludge villain grabbed a young girl and threatened to harm her unless he was allowed to leave the city. Shockwave pointed out that allowing him to escape would not guarantee the girl's safety or prevent further devastation elsewhere, and he would not permit such destruction. The sludge villain demanded compliance with a countdown, and the other heroes arrived to witness the tense standoff. The girl pleaded to be released. The sludge villain barked at her to be quiet and challenged Shockwave to decide what he would do. Heroes feared Shockwave's next move when he activated his Techvolt emitter, and the standoff reached a critical moment. The confrontation continued as both sides held their positions, the outcome hanging in the balance. An anxious voice warned that using the device would electrocute both the hostage and someone. Shockwave moved with precise speed, using the Techvolt emitter to pull the hostage away from the sludge villain and take the villain completely off guard. He closed the distance and struck with a thunderblast that left the villain disoriented and terrified. The villain pleaded for mercy, but Shockwave's demeanor radiated cold resolve. He denied the plea, arguing that no mercy could be offered to one who had shown none. Before the heroes could intervene, Shockwave activated both Techvolt emitters and unleashed a powerful surge of energy. The energy overwhelmed the villain's form in a burst of light and force that sent debris scattering without lingering gore or gruesome detail. The villain's cries ended as the disturbance subsided, and when the dust cleared, the threat was gone. Shockwave deactivated his weapons and hurried to check on the girl, who looked up at him, shaken. Shockwave scanned her and noted that her vitals were still elevated from the near-death experience, but that there was no lasting physical damage. He asked after her parents. Voices calling the child's name rang out across the scene, and the girl now identified as Mio ran into her parents' arms. The three embraced in relief, grateful to be safe. The moment of relief was interrupted when the nearby heroes moved in to secure the situation. Empty Lady had returned to full height, Death Arms took a defensive stance, Backdraft controlled the crowd, and Kamui Woods formed wooden batons to contain the area. All Might arrived with his trademark presence and announced that the villain would be arrested. Shockwave regarded the assembled heroes, unmoved, and questioned the logic of apprehending the person who had just stopped a villain and rescued the hostage before further casualties could occur. His calm challenge caught many of them off guard. Death Arms insisted that Shockwave's actions qualified as vigilantism and therefore merited arrest. Shockwave countered by pointing out that several of the heroes had been ill-equipped for the encounter and had been overwhelmed by the situation. Empty Lady objected that what Shockwave had done was unacceptable, and Shockwave replied by noting that her size had been more of a liability in that particular clash. Kamui Woods argued that Shockwave had no right to take the law into his own hands, and Shockwave observed that the other heroes present had been out of their elements as well. Backdraft remained unreadable, but his expression matched the others. Shockwave pressed the point that, while the heroes had performed admirably within their limits, their quirks were not suited for every type of threat, and prolonging the confrontation could have led to far worse consequences. The gathered heroes fell silent, understanding the implication of his assessment. Mio approached Shockwave and, on behalf of the citizens of Mizudafu, thanked him for saving them. Shockwave accepted the gratitude without seeking it. He formed a bridge of hardened ground and, as he opened a portal, addressed the onlookers one last time. He offered a stark perspective. Not every choice was black and white, and there would be times when heroes must make impossible decisions to prevent greater harm, even if those decisions crossed difficult moral lines. He explained that his lethal action had been driven by the intent to prevent further loss for families like Mio's. After uttering that reasoning, Shockwave passed through the portal, which closed behind him and left the heroes and bystanders to contemplate what had just occurred. All Might wondered aloud who Shockwave truly was. 10 years earlier, aboard Starscream's warship, Shockwave announced that his goal was unity before initiating his self-destruct sequence. The ship sounded a series of warning beeps and then exploded in a tremendous blast. Starscream cried out in anguish, slammed his hands in rage on the console, and lamented that they had been so close to capturing Shockwave while also suffering the loss of their finest soldiers. A Decepticon admitted that they should have anticipated this turn of events. A soldier reported to Starscream that, before the eye detonated, his scanners had picked up a Cybertronian signal moving away from the blast at very high velocity, and that the signature matched Shockwave's. Starscream perked up and asked if they had a fix on Shockwave's location. The soldier replied that the self-destruct had scrambled any means of locating him and offered two possibilities. Either Shockwave had faked his death or he had somehow cloned himself. Another soldier confirmed those were the only explanations he could provide. A different soldier then reported that native life signals were encroaching on the eye at a rapid pace, most likely humans, and asked for orders. Starscream considered the situation and ordered his forces to hold position for the time being. He reasoned that moving in now would compromise their altered mission, and that the eye's self-destruct left nothing salvageable to fall into human hands. They would remain patient and wait for Shockwave to resurface. When he did, Starscream intended to make his move. The soldiers acknowledged the order. Starscream smiled, promised revenge against Megatron, and vowed that Shockwave would be forced to serve him. He laughed as the view pulled away. At the Midoriya residence, Inko turned on the television and froze at a breaking news broadcast. The female reporter described a flaming object that had fallen from the sky and crashed on the outskirts of Mizudafu, prompting heroes to investigate. Before they could fully assess the scene, another explosion had occurred, accelerating the response to protect the city. Aikichi, on the scene, reported that the only visible evidence of the impact was a massive crater more than 500 meters across. He noted that investigators were unsettled by the lack of debris or clues, as if the source had destroyed itself to avoid discovery. All Might, interviewed briefly, offered only that such events rarely happened without reason, a hunch that gave the investigation some direction. Inko turned off the television and urged her son to come to dinner. Izuku asked innocently what might have been there before the explosion, and Inko, stern and frightened, said she did not want to know and insisted he eat before the food got cold. After dinner, Izuku went to his room, stared at the sky for a moment, and briefly assumed his human Shockwave form. In that voice, he vowed to avenge his predecessor and follow through on that promise. The day after the battle in downtown Mizudafu, the Midoriya household watched television coverage of a new crisis. The reporter announced that a villain called the Sludge Villain had been confronted by a vigilante known as Shockwave in a confrontation that had moved from a shopping district into downtown. The report warned viewers that the footage could be upsetting. Cell phone videos shown on air captured Shockwave fighting the Sludge Villain amid falling debris and panicked bystanders. Several people sustained injuries from the chaos, and the scene left widespread destruction in its wake. The footage concluded with the Sludge Villain's decisive defeat. Inko became visibly shaken at what she saw on the screen. The reporter recounted that, before disappearing, Shockwave had criticized the hero community's preparedness and suggested that, in extreme circumstances, heroes might be forced to make impossible choices to prevent greater tragedies. The statement unsettled many viewers and led to a broader debate about the responsibilities of those who protect others. The broadcast also reported that the hostage known as Mio had approached Shockwave to express gratitude before she passed through a mysterious portal. Shockwave then vanished, and the Hero Society issued a vigilante alert asking anyone with information to contact authorities. Aikichi resumed reporting from downtown Mizudafu, bearing witness to the aftermath and the cleanup efforts as the city tried to recover. From a distance, the destruction stretched as far as the eye could see. Opinions about the battle, however, were sharply divided among heroes and civilians. MT Lady declared the outcome unacceptable and insisted the sludge villain should have been captured and brought to justice. Death Arms argued the whole incident could have been avoided if the one-eyed vigilante had not interfered with professional hero work. Backdraft warned the interference could have caused even more death and destruction. Kamui Woods maintained that it was not for any single person to take the law into their own hands. Civilians offered different perspectives. One citizen said the vigilante had saved many lives, even though the speaker's father had later needed intensive care for serious injuries. Another civilian admitted the aftermath had been disturbing and that they preferred things done by the book, but added that the vigilante's statement before leaving had given them pause. They wondered whether other villains might have committed similar acts without being stopped, and whether the system sometimes allowed crimes to go unpunished. Aikichi then introduced a segment focusing on Mio and her parents' perspective on the purple-armored figure calling himself Shockwave. Mio recounted that when the sludge villain grabbed her she had been terrified. Having no quirk, she had felt defenseless and had feared for her life. When Shockwave used his tools to free her and neutralize the sludge villain, she realized the immediate threat had ended and that the villain would no longer be able to harm others in the same way. Mio's mother expressed that if not for Shockwave they might have lost their daughter, and Mio's father said he could not thank Shockwave enough. At UA Academy, Principal Nizu presided over a meeting of pro-heroes and HPSC members to discuss the events downtown and the figure known as Shockwave. Endeavor opened by stressing the need to deal with a dangerous vigilante. Namuri Koyama agreed, emphasizing that they also had to plan how to arrest him. Nizu confirmed both points. Hawks raised concerns about how to apprehend someone with powerful weapons and shown willingness to use lethal force, and noted that the vigilante's speech had resonated with many people. Mirko suggested they defeat him and send him to Tartarus, saying it plainly and with a confident expression. Endeavor dismissed that plan as short-sighted but admitted it had merit. He proposed keeping an extra lookout and, if Shockwave were spotted, moving in together to order him to surrender, taking him down if necessary and interrogating him afterward. Namuri agreed the plan sounded viable but questioned where Shockwave might strike next and warned that the League of Villains could take an interest in him, perhaps even try to recruit him. Nizu sided with Endeavor's approach and ordered a doubled effort to capture the vigilante, insisting the operation follow textbook procedure with no room for error. All Might urged that students and faculty be instructed to report any sightings, avoid engagement, and stay out of the vigilante's path until professionals handled the situation. He expressed concern that past events might be resurfacing and that recent incidents could signal a larger shift. The assembled heroes agreed. In the League of Villains hideout, members reviewed footage of the vigilante with varying reactions. All for One, known to some as Zen Shigaraki, paid close attention. Dabi asked who the purple, eye-patch-bearing figure was. Himiko Toga reacted with excited fascination at the sight of him. Tamura Shigaraki, All for One's protege and adopted son, studied the footage intently and asked what they should do about Shockwave, noting that this vigilante did not resemble the usual heroes and did not appear to hold back a trait that raised concerns about how he might act if they encountered him. All for One agreed that the situation warranted their attention. He clearly made short work of the sludge villain, in a manner that even I had not expected, and the observers quickly realized he might be useful. The other villains watched, wondering what malicious plan All for One had in mind. All for One explained that if Shockwave had killed the sludge villain, he would have made enemies of the heroes even as he had stirred the populace. He proposed two scenarios: lure Shockwave and offer him a place in the League, or allow the heroes to apprehend him so that with Shockwave gone, their plans would proceed more easily. The villains regarded him with expressions ranging from fear to disbelief, but All for One cautioned that they did not have enough information on Shockwave to form a reliable plan. There were too many unknowns that made recruiting, framing, arresting, or eliminating him risky. For now, he ordered, they should wait and have the doctor on standby to collect any samples from places Shockwave had been. The doctor's abilities could be useful with or without his presence. The villains in the room exchanged sinister smiles. Far from Earth, a soldier reported to Starscream that they had intercepted a native broadcast using Shockwave as its cover story from the previous day. Starscream demanded to see it immediately. The soldier played the footage, Shockwave's debut, his brutal but stylized fight, and the decisive finish of the sludge villain depicted with dramatic flair rather than gore. The replay also showed Shockwave addressing the cameras with a statement suggesting that heroes might be forced to cross lines they had vowed to never cross if circumstances demanded it. When the replay ended, Starscream responded with a triumphant grin and began issuing orders. He told the construct icons to report to the bridge for their objectives. The construct icons assembled. Hook asked if he had been summoned. Starscream directed Hook and the others to begin preparations for Shockwave's eventual recapture and to scout Earth for a suitable base of operations. He assigned 3 objectives: scout the planet for a place to build operations, take notes on the populace in case subjugation became necessary, and gather more information on Shockwave and any future exploits. Starscream reported that Shockwave's last known position was near a human settlement called Muzudafu City and ordered drop pods to insert the construct icons on the outskirts to avoid drawing attention while they scouted. Mixmaster added that he had intercepted occasional Autobot transmissions indicating the Autobots also wanted to capture Shockwave and return him to Cybertron. He urged immediate deployment to beat the Autobots to the site. Starscream reminded Mixmaster that he issued orders and then sent the construct icons on their way. The construct icons acknowledged and moved out. Meanwhile, aboard an Autobot ship, soldiers who had once guarded Shockwave's prison reviewed the same broadcast. One Autobot observed to a comrade that he may have found Shockwave in an unexpected situation. The other Autobot watched the footage and wondered aloud what Shockwave was doing fighting a gelatinous creature. They triangulated the source of the broadcast and contacted the warden, reporting that they had located Shockwave and were initiating pursuit to reapprehend him. The warden authorized any means necessary for recapture and approved a request for reinforcements, promising to dispatch 10 troops once coordinates were sent. The pursuing Autobots sent the coordinates and video for verification. The warden confirmed receipt and verification and instructed them to make haste and set up a base to guide incoming reinforcements. The Autobots acknowledged the order, and the ship jumped to hyperspace. Back on Earth, inside the Midoriya residence, Izuku made his way to the basement and pressed a well-hidden button embedded in the wall. After a quick scan of his hand, a hidden door revealed a path to the hideout he had been building for years. He closed the door behind him, descended to his lab, and began analyzing what he had obtained, a DNA scan of the now-deceased sludge villain. Along the way he shifted into his Shockwave form. Shockwave activated his equipment and set to work, uploading the scan into his main computer and recording a concise log entry describing the subject's composition and notable properties. But attacking with elemental forces such as electrocution had a different effect on him, and the results were as expected. He considered preserving a sample of the now-deceased subject to begin experiments aimed at improving his usefulness to society. After calculating what the subject had done and attempted during the scientist's debut, however, preserving the body was ruled out. If the sludge villain had been able to escape All Might's custody by accident or design and obtain the scientist's equipment, the devastation would be far worse. For that reason, the scientist scanned the DNA and destroyed the rest of the body. Though it delayed the start of experimentation, eliminating the villain was the only logical option to prevent further catastrophe. The log ended. He then continued working on other experiments within the confines of his lab until his instruments detected a vast surge of energy 20 miles from Muzudafu. Shockwave examined the energy readings and immediately recognized the signature. He inferred that a space bridge had opened nearby and that someone must be trying to triangulate his position. It was logical to surmise that his debut against the sludge villain had revealed his location. He decided an investigation was warranted but resolved to exercise extra caution. He reverted briefly to Izuku and called his mother. Izuku told his mother that he would be gone for a while and promised to be back by dinner if everything went well. Inko told him to stay safe and that she loved him. Izuku thanked her. He then transformed back into Shockwave, activated his personal ground bridge, and proceeded on his journey. At UA Academy, the new students minus Izuku walked through the building and took their seats for orientation. Present Mike greeted the students with his usual energetic presence and introduced himself as the school DJ, encouraging a response from the crowd. The auditorium was so quiet a pin could be heard drop. Present Mike then explained the exercise. There were 3 types of faux villains in every battle center, and students would earn points based on difficulty. He instructed them to use their quirks to increase their scores by defeating the faux villains while remaining within heroic guidelines. Attacking another examinee was strictly forbidden. An examinee raised a concern about the event materials. The student pointed out that the printout listed 4 types of villains, not 3, and expressed disappointment, arguing that such a mistake was unacceptable for Japan's most notable school. Present Mike thanked the student, identified the 4th villain as a 0-point obstacle placed merely to block paths, and explained that while it could be defeated, it offered no points and was intended to be avoided. He advised the audience to ignore the 0-point obstacle and focus on the targets that would lead them to victory. The student bowed in thanks and the others began to understand the rules. Present Mike concluded the orientation and presented the students with a reminder of the school's motto, referencing Napoleon Bonaparte's idea that a true hero is one who overcomes life's misfortunes. The students were then sent to the arena. The competition was about to begin when a sudden explosion echoed across the area. The rookies watched the distant blast with expressions ranging from awe to alarm. Shockwave emerged from his portal half a mile from the origin of the energy signature, a scanner in hand pointing him toward the source. He followed the readings to a ridge that overlooked a construction site. The site functioned as a transfer point for large cargo. Decepticon soldiers were moving containers of energon toward a supply depot. Outside one depot, a Decepticon with a cement mixer-shaped drum was overseeing the operation. He was identified as Mixmaster, and he warned the workers to handle the energon carefully to avoid an explosion. Hook stood to Mixmaster's left and reported that they needed a little more time before testing the bridge to ensure it was fully operational. Mixmaster asked if the capacitor was finished. Hook replied that it only needed final adjustments. Mixmaster said he would attend to them immediately. From his vantage point on the ridge, Shockwave noted that these had to be the Decepticons his predecessor had defected from. With the energy signature located, he decided the logical next step was to observe their operations. He scaled the ridge and adopted a stealthy approach. Up close, he took in the scene: patrols moving through the area, bots hauling raw materials for the Constructicons to transform into components for the space bridge portal. The facility hummed with organized activity, and Shockwave kept to the shadows as he investigated. A comms station stood ready to link with Starscream's ship and monitor Earth radio frequencies, and a nearby barracks provided rest for the troops between shifts. Shockwave moved through the facility with deliberate calm. Before reaching the command terminal, he planted a hidden explosive near the energon supply depot and quietly took some energon for later use. Using his small size to avoid notice, Shockwave reached the terminal and downloaded its data. The files showed Starscream's plan to locate Shockwave, execute him for his defection, and press forward with the intended subjugation of the planet and its people. He headed for the comms center, but his presence did not go unnoticed. Mixmaster spotted him and called out angrily, drawing the attention of every Decepticon present. They rushed forward and raised their weapons. The Constructicons moved through the crowd and surrounded Shockwave. Mixmaster taunted Shockwave with a cruel question about what had happened to him, implying a botched experiment. The other Constructicons chuckled. Shockwave answered coolly that, despite his smaller form, he knew why they were there and that Megatron had disbanded the Decepticons. Mixmaster rejected the claim and insisted Starscream still sought revenge, offering Shockwave a choice: help complete the space bridge and be taken to Starscream, or die as a traitor. Shockwave proposed a third option. He would end the threat quickly to prevent the Decepticons from enslaving his new home. Bonecrusher lunged at him and fired his blaster. Shockwave dodged with ease and detonated the explosive he had planted. The blast rocked the area and sent a visible shock through parts of Mizudafu. Citizens watched in shock from the streets and from UA Academy. Pro-heroes on patrol alerted others and mobilized to respond. In the ruined space bridge chamber, Hook screamed that Shockwave would pay. Shockwave reverted to full size and declared he would not back down before charging the Decepticon soldiers. He activated his Techvolt emitter and used it to incapacitate groups of Decepticons with precise, disabling strikes that left them immobilized and neutralized without graphic harm. The construct icons stared in stunned silence at how quickly and efficiently their comrades had been taken out. They hesitated, then opened fire again. Shockwave created a shield with his Techvolt on one arm and swapped his weapon to the other, returning fire until the remaining soldiers were down and only the construct icons remained. He remarked that their chosen path had been doomed and asked if they wished to continue. Before the battle could escalate, pro-heroes arrived and commanded everyone to freeze. They surrounded Shockwave and the construct icons, who displayed looks of pure rage. Endeavor declared that all present were under arrest. A nearby excavator form Decepticon mocked Endeavor's flaming appearance. Mixmaster surveyed the humans and relayed his cold analysis to the construct icons, warning they should not be underestimated. MT Lady grew to full height and demanded surrender. News helicopters descended, broadcasting the standoff across Mizudafu. The viewing public had no idea what was about to unfold. Hook responded that the humans would suffer for their interference and gave the command for the construct icons to unite. They complied, assembling into the towering Devastator. The transformation left the heroes stunned. Devastator roared a threat and the heroes launched an assault. Endeavor struck with his flashfire fist, but the blow barely affected the enormous form. Devastator retaliated with heavy fire that sent multiple pro-heroes tumbling. Midnight attempted to subdue the giant with her scent-based fans and a whip, but Devastator had no susceptibility to her aroma and the whip had little effect. As Midnight tried to retreat, Devastator grabbed her briefly before throwing her away with tremendous force. She was slammed into a nearby tree and knocked unconscious. Devastator then turned toward Milady as she attempted a decisive kick. He fired to stop her advance, striking her leg and leaving her unable to continue, forcing her to fall aside and be tended to by teammates. The pro-heroes were pressed hard by the overwhelming power of the combined Decepticons, and the fight intensified as each side struggled for control. She clasped her foot and shrieked. The cry carried to Mizudafu and signaled that the heroes were in trouble. Devastator fired at her, striking her left leg and causing a painful injury. The other heroes recoiled at the machine before them. Endeavor prepared his signature attack and unleashed Prominence Burn. The blast engulfed the robot and produced an explosion that could be seen and heard from Mizudafu. Endeavor panted from the effort. Smoke and dust filled the area. For 10 seconds nothing moved, and when the haze cleared the construct icons had reverted to their individual forms, unconscious from the point of impact. The heroes gathered their wounded for transport to the ICU and searched for Shockwave, but he was nowhere to be found. Endeavor cursed loudly, blaming the unknown vigilante and vowing that he would make him pay and ensure he was brought to justice. All Might approached Endeavor and urged him to rein himself in, saying that he also intended to capture the vigilante but that the battle was over and their priority now was to get the wounded to the ICU. Endeavor reluctantly agreed to leave interrogation to the proper process but insisted on conducting his own questioning of the captured construct icons. All Might reminded him to avoid killing them before they could be questioned. Medical transports were called for the critically wounded to the UA infirmary, and heavy transport equipment was brought in to move the unconscious construct icons away from the public. On a nearby ridge, Shockwave observed and recorded the entire fight from start to finish. He stopped the recording, activated his ground bridge, and returned to the lab with the new data. He reviewed the footage and noted in his analysis that the construct icons resembled Earth's construction vehicles but were capable of combining into the larger form Devastator. The combiner had held its ground long enough to injure many heroes before Endeavor's Prominence Burn had overwhelmed it and forced the reversion. Shockwave concluded that more confrontations were likely and that he would need to prepare for escalating threats. His thoughts were interrupted by a text from his mother saying dinner would be ready in 15 minutes. He reverted to his identity as Izuku and replied that he would be there shortly. He then exited the hidden lab. Inside the UA Academy ICU, many students gathered outside, faces ranging from worried to horrified as they watched the pro-heroes in varying conditions from broken bones to critical states. Two of the heroes, Midnight and Lady, lay in beds with life monitors. Both looked as if they had been through hell and back. Nurse Healing Lady stood between their berths with a grave expression and stepped outside to give the update. The two would survive but would need about a month to return to full strength. A student asked about the others, and Healing Lady responded that most would need at least a week to recover. In a meeting room at UA, discussions about the recent battle continued. Nizu asked whether some of the heroes were recovering. All Might replied that while physical recovery was underway, full psychological readiness might take up to a year at the current pace. The room fell silent at the implication. Nizu then inquired about Endeavor. All Might said that Endeavor was interrogating the captured constructs and was confident he would obtain answers. Given the number of pro-heroes out of commission, All Might had reached out to other countries to request support and had called for additional heroes with specific quirks. He had also ordered security tightened and the number of pro-heroes monitoring the ongoing student trials to be doubled. Several reinforcements were expected within a day or two. Nizu approved, noting that if the trials could proceed without incident they would at least have something to look forward to. An unexpected phone call then came in. Nizu looked at the screen and saw an unfamiliar number. Before he could react, the call connected. A voice came through asking if this was Principal Nizu of UA Academy. Everyone present stopped as Nizu confirmed his identity and asked who was calling. The caller replied that the caller's identity did not matter. What mattered was who and what the Academy was dealing with Shockwave. The caller said they had information about Shockwave's presence on Earth and would share it at a set of coordinates and a time that they would send. The caller instructed Nizu to bring his most trusted and to ensure they were not followed by anyone else. The caller told everyone to hold questions until the meeting and ended the call. All Might broke into a cold sweat from the call. The rabbit heroine Mirko declared that if someone had the information to take Shockwave down, she was all for it. Hawks warned Mirko to hold back and asked how they knew the caller was not a phony. Nizu explained that the caller had already given coordinates and a secluded meeting place far from the city. Mirko warned that the caller might be trying to set a trap. Hawks suggested the meeting might be intended to keep the public safe, and asked Nizu what he wanted to do. Nizu took a few minutes to think before instructing them to notify Endeavor and inform him that a mysterious contact claimed to have information on Shockwave. Nizu ordered that special forces be stationed about a mile from their position in case the meeting was a trap. The other heroes nodded in agreement. High above, two Autobots sighed about the arrangement. One Autobot lamented having to deceive the locals but acknowledged the need to avoid exposing their mission. The other Autobot pointed out that once they enlisted some of the natives, they could deal with Shockwave and return to Cybertron, and urged patience and cooperation for now. In Shockwave's lab, Shockwave made final adjustments to two new devices, a power-up called the Siege Pack and a weapon system called the Sling Shock. He opened another log and recorded that he had updated systems based on his analysis of the hero's recent skirmish with Devastator. He noted earlier tests had been unsatisfactory but that buried Cybertronian ships and their materials and schematics had been invaluable. Those discoveries had allowed him to complete his experiments and reduce previous drawbacks. He also recorded a secret function in the Siege Pack to be used only as a last resort and stated that he must be ready before those tools were needed. He closed the log. At the Midoriya residence, Inko sat glued to the screen as the news replayed how the monster robot had overwhelmed the heroes. She was horrified. Her close friend Mitsuki, Katsuki's mother, watched alongside her, sharing the same shock and worrying about what would happen if Katsuki encountered Devastator. Inko exclaimed that she wished it were a dream, and Mitsuki confessed she felt the same and would not want her son to face that threat. Both women felt the fear that the situation might still get worse. In an underground facility, the Constructicons lay bound in thick metal chains while Endeavor interrogated them with a furious posture. Endeavor demanded who they were, who had sent them, and why they had come to Earth. Bone Crusher refused to give information and insulted Endeavor with contempt. Endeavor responded by unleashing controlled blasts of heat to intimidate them. The threat caused visible reactions but remained non-lethal. Endeavor warned that his patience had worn thin, reminded them of Shockwave's escapes and the destruction they had caused in Japan, and ordered them to start talking or face consequences. Bone Crusher defiantly said he would rather die than give anything up and taunted Endeavor by suggesting that killing them would make Endeavor into the kind of villain he opposed. The other construct icons laughed at Endeavor. A scientist's voice over the loudspeaker then called Endeavor to report to the briefing room. Nizu needed to speak with him about the recent events. Endeavor forced himself to calm down and left, and the construct icons watched him go with smirks. Endeavor arrived in the meeting room where Nizu was already on screen. Endeavor said that the matter had better be important. Nizu explained that a mysterious contact had called with information on Shockwave and wanted to meet at a secluded location, likely to keep the public away. Endeavor asked when and where, and Nizu instructed him to return to UA immediately because the contact wanted them to come as a single unit. Endeavor agreed and said he would be on his way, hoping they could get answers before more harm occurred. Before leaving, he instructed a base commander to have the construct icons transferred to another facility, in order the commander acknowledged, and then he headed back to UA Academy. When the base commander left, he sent a coded message to an unknown contact that the good doctor needed to bring the big boss into the matter. Since the so-called construct icons were connected to Shockwave in the hunt for him, an alliance might be necessary. He included the departure times and destinations of the transports. The contact replied that with the help of these aliens, their plans would proceed faster. The construct icons learned of this and began making plans of their own. By 11 p.m. in a secluded area, Endeavor checked the perimeter and asked Nizu if this was really where their contact had asked them to meet. Nizu confirmed that it was precisely the place their contact had requested and added that he had arranged for special forces to be nearby in case it was a trap. The group remained on alert. A whirring noise announced the arrival of a spacecraft that touched down roughly 20 meters away. A ramp lowered with a mechanical hiss, and two robots emerged, similar in size to Shockwave but bearing color schemes that suggested law enforcement. The first Autobot looked over the assembled heroes and then at Nizu, questioning whether these were Nizu's most trusted personnel. Nizu replied that these were everyone and asked if they were the ones who had contacted him. The second Autobot noted additional heat signatures a short distance away and questioned the presence of more forces. Nizu apologized and explained that they had not wanted to take chances and had brought reinforcements to avoid walking into a trap. The first Autobot then gave a measured account of Shockwave's history. Shockwave was identified as a Decepticon who had aided the destruction of Cybertron under Megatron's campaign to impose peace through tyranny. The Autobots had stood against that plan under Optimus Prime. The war had lasted millions of Earth years and ultimately ended with an Autobot victory, though some details of the conclusion remained unclear. The Autobots had captured Shockwave thanks to a tip from an unknown source, then imprisoned him. Shockwave had since escaped, and it was now the Autobots' duty to find him and bring him back to stand trial for his crimes against Cybertron. The heroes absorbed the information in stunned silence. Endeavor acknowledged that this explained a lot and that they had planned to take Shockwave to their prison until the Autobots revealed his background. Hawks voiced confusion about Shockwave's recent behavior. He had apparently protected innocents during the last incident, freeing a young person headed for UA and saving a hostage, and he had demonstrated the ability to change his size at will. Hawks wondered why Shockwave would act that way, and how he had gained those abilities. The first Autobot admitted that they did not yet know the answers and that finding Shockwave might reveal why he had escaped to Earth. Nizu agreed that their collaboration could also resolve questions the heroes had been unable to answer. The next morning, students prepared for the next round of trials. Emotions ran high, nerves and determination mixed among them as they readied for a heroes versus villains exercise. Teams were assigned across the 19 students, and Katsuki volunteered to go solo. All Might explained the rules, and the exercise began. It concluded with the villain team prevailing, and Katsuki took much of the credit for how easily he had handled the hero team's attempts to defuse the simulated threat. Elsewhere, a military convoy of heavy trucks, armored vehicles, and attack helicopters was traveling toward a top-secret facility when the situation suddenly escalated. Projectiles and explosive ordnance struck the convoy, turning the route into a chaotic battlefield. The construct icons in maintenance sleep mode nearby were roused by the sounds of alarms and explosions. A group of humans converged on the area and quickly removed the restraints that had held the construct icons. The construct icons were surprised by the sudden turn of events. Mixmaster asked the rescuers who they were. A member of the group identified themselves as seeking the Constructicans' assistance for a task involving Shockwave. Hook bluntly asked if their intent was to kill Shockwave and indicated willingness to join such an effort. Tamura clarified that their leader wanted to see whether Shockwave could be brought onto their side instead. Mix Master reacted angrily, insisting that Shockwave was a traitor who must be eliminated. Tamura suggested consulting with their master about a cooperative approach, noting that their leader had been impressed with the Constructicans' effectiveness against the heroes. Mix Master weighed the options, thinking about larger strategic aims. Starscream had plans to subjugate the planet, while these flesh-and-blood insurgents aimed to overthrow the heroes. With the heroes removed, nothing would stand in Starscream's way, but Shockwave remained an unpredictable factor. Mix Master opened a secure channel to Starscream and proposed an idea that might interest him. Starscream responded that Mixmaster's previous failures had tested his patience but that he was willing to hear the proposal. Mixmaster explained that other humans shared their agenda on the planet and suggested a possible alliance, then fed Starscream coordinates for a meeting. Tamura supplied the coordinates. An attendant reminded everyone to arrive on time, explaining that their master had limited patience and disliked wasting time. Starscream acknowledged this and said he would speak with the master soon. The Constructicons and the League of Villains exchanged evil grins. All for One and his entourage made their way onto Starscream's ship, which was parked on the ground in a secluded area away from the prying eyes of the public and the heroes. Starscream asked if these were the humans who wished to cause chaos in the world. All for One confirmed this and asked in return whether they wanted to kill Shockwave for an act of betrayal. Starscream replied that Shockwave was a traitor to the Decepticons and therefore must be eliminated swiftly and without mercy. All for One asked why, since Shockwave was powerful and it was hard to see why he would betray them. Starscream explained that Shockwave had followed his former lord and master and had refused to join Starscream's plan to kill Megatron. Shockwave had rejected the offer because he would not betray Megatron even though Megatron was no longer his leader. Starscream declared that any Decepticons who refused to follow would be punished, with Shockwave set to suffer. All for One suggested they might have a way to lure Shockwave out and destroy him, noting that Shockwave was protecting the populace while being classified as a vigilante willing to kill. Tamura then outlined a plan. They intended to launch an assault on the USJ to draw out All Might, reasoning that Shockwave, who cared about civilians and would respond to such a threat, would likely reveal himself. Teaming up for the assault would create a double opportunity to neutralize both heroes and Shockwave. Starscream agreed that it would be a double strike. The scene shifted to Class 1A, where Mr. Aizawa briefed the students on recent developments. Aizawa explained that MT Lady and Midnight were off duty for at least a year and would not be able to resume work, and that recent events had forced several changes to the schedule. He said the sports festival would still go on but with twice as many heroes on guard, and that more pro heroes were being called in as backup. As a precaution, training would emphasize hand-to-hand combat in addition to quirks, to better prepare them for trouble ahead. Momo asked whether classes and the overall schedule would remain the same aside from the increased training. Aizawa assured her the schedule would largely remain, but the routine would be more strenuous than originally planned. Fumikage suggested the changes were because of Shockwave's actions and asked what the students should do about him. Aizawa instructed them to stay out of sight and report Shockwave's whereabouts, warning that Shockwave was willing to kill and could be a danger even to students. Shoto reflected that although Shockwave had given a speech justifying his actions during the sludge villain incident, something about him suggested there was more beneath the surface than his methods alone. Tenya noted that Shockwave was a vigilante and that vigilantism was illegal, so Shockwave would have to face justice. Aizawa added that pro-heroes were already working on apprehending him. Bakugo vowed he would be the one to take Shockwave down and insisted everyone watch him as he prepared to confront the threat. Todoroki pointed out that Shockwave had defeated the sludge villain where other heroes had failed and warned that Shockwave had more quirks or weapons than they might realize. Aizawa agreed and reminded the class that Shockwave had not been given the rank of #1 vigilante of Japan for nothing. He then ordered the class to begin training intensively. The students left the classroom in an orderly fashion. Meanwhile, Izuku was walking along the streets, minding his own business, when a bank alarm went off. He slipped into a dark alley near the bank, ensured no one was watching, and assumed the identity of Shockwave to access surveillance feeds and assess the situation. He determined there were 20 armed criminals using small arms and quirks, with 6 hostages hiding in the back room and about 50 in the lobby, and that the criminals would likely demand ransom. Through the cameras he saw terrified civilians and several pro-heroes outside who were forming a plan. Loudspeakers inside the bank came to life, and the leader warned that if his demands were not met, the hostages would be harmed, and any heroes attempting to intervene would meet the same fate. Present among the heroes outside were Present Mike, Mirko, and Endeavor. They examined the list of wanted names. Endeavor explained that these people had been locked up for life for heinous crimes and could not be allowed to go free. Present Mike noted that they also had to manage the hostages. Mirko said they had to stop the criminals and send them back to prison. While they planned, Shockwave, in his human-sized form, climbed the building and reached the door to the 20th floor. He found the electrical fuse box, rewired it to the built-in speakers, and used the connection to make an announcement ordering the criminals to drop their weapons and leave through the front door within 10 minutes or face assault. His voice carried through the building and put everyone on edge. The heroes prepared for action while the criminals inside panicked. One of them wondered how Shockwave had found them. Another asked if they should surrender. The leader refused, insisting they could not back down, and threatened to shoot everyone if Shockwave entered. A precise laser blast from an unseen shooter struck 3 of the criminals, sending them crashing back and leaving them badly injured. Their screams of pain horrified the civilians, who reacted in terror. The remaining criminals aimed their weapons toward the shooter and realized it was Shockwave. Shockwave commented that their resolve was clear and questioned whether their accomplices shared it. The heroes burst in. Endeavor ordered everyone to surrender. Gunfire erupted, and Endeavor used his flames to intercept bullets. The crooks threw down some weapons and activated their quirks, but Shockwave moved fast to prevent them from using those powers and returned fire in quick succession, neutralizing several assailants. 6 criminals remained and took refuge behind hostages. The leader swore to kill Shockwave. As tensions rose, a mechanical were announced something else was at play. The leader demanded the hostages be used as shields and warned the heroes not to fire, claiming his quirk allowed him to transfer pain to others and appropriate another person's strength. Shockwave said he was not fooled and offered to spare their lives if they surrendered peacefully. Shockwave activated a sling-like device on his right hand and fired at the criminal's feet. The chain shot wrapped around them, tripping one and sending another sprawling. A hostage seized the opportunity to run, and when a criminal tried to use his quirk to attack, Shockwave fired his hyperflux cannon and stopped him. Shockwave then asked if anyone else wanted to continue the futile struggle. Faced with Shockwave's precision and determination, the remaining criminals raised their hands and surrendered. They were handcuffed and led out to a police truck. The heroes watched as the prisoners were loaded. Shockwave began to leave. Endeavor demanded to know where he was going. Shockwave said he needed to tend to other matters. Present Mike reminded him he was on the wanted list and would have to be brought in. Before Shockwave could respond, Mirko struck from behind with a hard blow that sent him tumbling. Mirko grinned and told him it was down to her. Shockwave warned her not to pursue the conflict. Mirko replied that she had wanted to take him down since he first appeared. Endeavor and Present Mike moved in and pushed their quirks to full power. Endeavor ordered Shockwave to stand down. Shockwave replied that he did not wish to harm them and questioned whether they understood why he had acted as he did. Present Mike insisted that Shockwave's actions had made things worse. Shockwave argued that the criminals had posed a lethal threat whether or not their demands were met. Endeavor said that being a vigilante was not acceptable and that Shockwave would be brought to justice. Shockwave activated his hyperflux cannon on his left arm and his touchvolt emitter on his right and braced for action. Mirko attacked with incredible speed. Shockwave countered with an electric construct shaped like a huge fist that slammed into Mirko and sent her reeling. He followed with a precise strike to her neck that rendered her unconscious. A sudden side attack knocked Shockwave down again, and a flame-infused punch followed, after which Endeavor pinned him under his boot and ordered him to stay down. Shockwave proposed an alternative and used a Shockwave ability to send Endeavor flying through the air. Seizing the moment, Shockwave transformed into his jet mode and blasted off at supersonic speed, escaping before the heroes could recover. Endeavor swore as he realized Shockwave had gotten away. Present Mike observed aloud that Shockwave was more powerful than they had first believed. One of the allies hoped that the pair would have more friends to help when they arrived. Endeavor warned that they had better be able to catch them, or he would scorch those rust buckets when he was done. High above, Shockwave flew in jet mode toward the coordinates his scanner provided. He transformed and landed on the ground, then activated his scanner. According to the scanner, the energy readings originated just beneath this mountain, Mount Fuji. He found the coincidence fitting. He had always wanted to visit, though he had not expected to be scanning a sacred place for energy signatures. Shockwave swept his optics across the mountain and discovered a hidden entrance carved into the rock. He found it peculiar that a cave entrance should exist in a place regarded as sacred. He traversed the cave for nearly 20 minutes before coming upon a sight that defied explanation. A vast metal superstructure lay buried under the mountain, old but intact enough to suggest long abandonment. Shockwave moved through the structure, taking in its strange architecture and the sense that it had been built with a purpose now forgotten. He eventually found a set of ancient Cybertronian hieroglyphs that told more of the story of Cybertron's origin and of his predecessor. The carvings portrayed Primus as the embodiment of creation and life and Unicron as the embodiment of destruction and death. They also revealed an older sister to them named Gaia, who embodied balance and reason. For a long time she had kept her brothers in check, but they eventually left her because of her constant reprimands about how their quarrels made a mess. Shockwave raised his left arm, activated his recorder, and logged that he had discovered new information about his predecessor that could challenge long-held assumptions about origin and purpose. He noted that before the familiar history of Primus and Unicron, there had been an elder sister whose role was to keep both of them in balance. She had been the voice of reason and sometimes supported actions that seemed questionable at first but proved justified in time. Shockwave speculated that his predecessor might serve as a fitting champion to such a being, much as the Primes served Primus. He also mentioned that a lingering energy reading had led him into the catacombs and that he intended to find its source. He ended the log and pressed onward. Deeper into the catacombs he came to a large temple and then to a round chamber that looked like a place of worship. Inside, scattered figures of alien Cybertronians rusted in silence, but Shockwave's attention focused on a statue of Gaia at the chamber's center. As he approached, the statue suddenly glowed green and a beam of light washed over him. The light extended beyond the structure, visible to two Autobots standing outside and observing. Before Shockwave could process what was happening, the beam transported him to a realm outside ordinary time and space, and he found himself in an unfamiliar, human form. Izuku wondered how this had happened. A voice answered that it had been her doing. He turned and saw a towering, gray techno-organic goddess in regal attire that shimmered with many colors. Her bright blue hair flowed as if charged with power, and her presence suggested centuries of authority. She introduced herself as Gaia and noted that it had been millennia since she had last received visitors, particularly ones who were not her followers. She asked how Izuku had come to know of her and her brothers. Izuku explained how Shockwave had arrived on Earth, how Izuku had gained unusual powers and used them for anti-heroic deeds, and how Shockwave's scanner had detected an energy signature here. He described finding the hieroglyphs that revealed more of Cybertron's origin, how the Great War had fractured things, and how one parallel Earth had become linked to Unicron. He related how Megatron had disbanded the Decepticons after being used by Unicron to house a dark essence, a chain of events that led towards Cybertron's near destruction. Gaia admitted she had not expected such developments after her quarrelsome brothers had gone their own ways. She was not surprised by Izuku's account. Primus and Unicron had been a constant headache, still fighting without seeing the larger perspective. She listened as Izuku explained that Unicron represented chaos and that without Primus Unicron would be diminished, while Primus, representing creation, could not have foreseen all the consequences of his actions. Conflict, Izuku surmised, proved as persistent as time itself. Gaia agreed that things might have been prevented had her brothers been less stubborn. She then turned her attention to Izuku, Sensing a spirited nature and a pattern of judgment she found reasonable despite his unconventional methods. She declared that she suspected, for the first time in millennia, she might have a champion suited to wield the matrix of balance. Izuku responded cautiously, reminding Gaia that they had only just met and he was not ready to accept any artifact. He questioned what use such a powerful object would have on Earth and worried it could be too dangerous there. Izuku feared he would become just like Megatron when Megatron formed the Decepticons that his predecessor had once served. Gaia explained that the matrix of balance functioned like the matrix of leadership and could only be used when its power was required by the situation. She added that she sensed an impending evil that might plunge the world into darkness at a later date and that she would need a well-trained champion when that time came. Izuku acknowledged that the darkness could involve Unicron in the future and asked what he must do to accept the Matrix. Gaia told him the Matrix would come to him in time and that, when it did, it would reveal everything. For now she instructed him to go forth and commit his anti-heroic deeds to ensure a greater tomorrow. Izuku thanked Gaia and said it had been nice talking to her and that he looked forward to meeting again. Gaia smiled and a bright light flared for a few seconds. When the light faded, Izuku found himself back in the real world in his Shockwave form. He examined the top of his chest plate and discovered Gaia's mark pulsing with a faint green glow. Shockwave noted that the revelation warranted a return to make notes. Before he could move, two Autobots approached with weapons drawn. One of them ordered Shockwave to hold his position, and the other declared that he was under arrest. Shockwave asked for the specific accusations and charges. The first Autobot demanded explanations. Shockwave replied that there was much to explain. Cybertron's history was not what it seemed, and he might not be the Shockwave they perceived him to be. The second Autobot insisted that he would come with them to answer questions and warned they could do this the easy way or the hard way. Shockwave said he had notes to take and, with swift precision, deployed restraining slings that captured the Autobots. He then delivered a non-lethal energy pulse that incapacitated them, leaving them unconscious. He immediately transformed into jet mode, flew to the cavern exit, summoned a ground bridge, and walked through it. The bridge closed behind him, leaving the two Autobots unconscious. Back in his lab, Shockwave recorded a log for the Fuji expedition. In the entry, he described his conversation with Gaia, sister to Primus and Unicron, who had deemed him worthy to be a Prime. He recorded that Gaia had told him about the power of her matrix and warned of an impending doom that might threaten the world. Because of that warning, he wrote that he would accept the matrix of balance and remain vigilant and prepared for when the time came to fight. At UA Academy, reporters crowded the gates trying to secure interviews after it was discovered that All Might would be teaching. The gate allowed only those with UA entry, and the reporters were kept outside, unable to get statements. Unknown to the crowd, Tamura Shigaraki stood at a distance from them. Inside Class 1A, Aizawa reviewed his students' performances from the Heroes vs. Villains exercise. He told Bakugo that, while he admired the decision to volunteer to go solo, Bakugo's actions had bordered on villainous behavior in another context and warned him to exercise better control in the future. Aizawa then announced that the class needed to select a class representative, and the students showed enthusiasm for the role. Ultimately, Tenya Ida and Momo Yaoyorozu were chosen as class representatives. Later, several pro-heroes gathered outside the school to inspect the now-defunct gate. Nizu asked how ordinary members of the press had been able to bypass the security systems and concluded aloud that someone else must have been behind the breach. He suspected a villain had infiltrated the school and wondered whether the act was merely a show of power or a declaration of war. Back in Class 1A, Aizawa announced that today's training would be different. All Might and another faculty member would assist and keep watch during the exercises. When a student asked what kind of training they would receive, Aizawa explained it would focus on rescue operations, preparing them to respond to natural disasters, shipwrecks, and similar emergencies. The announcement excited the students and prompted lively banter until Aizawa called for their attention. He instructed them that costume choices for the exercise were up to them but cautioned that they were not yet accustomed to full gear and might find their abilities slightly restricted. He explained that special training would take place at an off-campus facility and that they would travel there by bus. The students immediately began suiting up for the exercise. Outside the unforeseen simulation joint, the students were greeted by the pro-heroine known as 13, the space hero. She welcomed them and said she had been waiting, prompting visible excitement among many of the students. She expressed her eagerness to show them the facility. Inside, the students took in a vast training environment, ruined buildings and simulated natural disasters designed to challenge their rescue skills. 13 explained that she had created the facility to prepare them for different types of disasters and that she called it the unforeseen simulation joint. The students exchanged looks and agreed that they could call the facility USJ, just like Universal Studio Japan. Aizawa wondered whether All Might was supposed to be there already and guessed that he might have booked an interview instead. 13 corrected him, explaining that All Might had done too much hero work on the way to school that morning and had depleted much of his power, so he was resting in the teacher's lounge. Aizawa mentally noted that All Might's absence was irresponsible, but aloud he told the class that they should be okay with just the two teachers and that the clock was ticking, so they needed to get started. Before the exercises began, 13 addressed the students with a serious safety briefing. She introduced her quirk, Black Hole, and warned that it could absorb objects and be dangerous if misused. She reminded the students that quirks are tightly regulated in their society because of the harm they can cause when someone loses focus or misjudges a situation. She urged them to carry lessons from previous fitness and combat training into this class. Today they would learn to use their quirks to save lives, not to attack. After her remarks, the students cheered, and Aizawa moved to regain their attention and begin the drills. Suddenly, the power cut out and everyone was taken by surprise. At the fountain, a purple warp gate began to materialize, and a hand emerged from it. Aizawa immediately noticed and directed 13 to protect the students. As the students looked on, more figures stepped through the gate, menacing and unmistakably villainous. Ijiro wondered aloud whether training had already started and reminded everyone that they were supposed to be practicing rescues. Aizawa ordered everyone to stay back and, after putting on his goggles, confirmed that these were real villains. The revelation shocked the class. Inside the Midoriya residence, Izuku Midoriya in his Shockwave form was conducting experiments in the lab and recording an audio log. He reported progress in replicating and reverse engineering aspects of a sludge villain's properties to create sticky restraints and sticky bombs for use with his weapons, noting that the sludge villain's constitution had several interesting applications that warranted further analysis. He was preparing to leave the laboratory when his instruments alerted him to an anomaly and he triangulated the source, a portal at the unforeseen simulation joint that was not matching the usual space bridge signature. He dispatched the siege pack to scout the area immediately. The siege pack closed the gap in about 30 seconds and relayed a feedback to Shockwave. From the lab feed, Shockwave saw that villains were at USJ and outnumbered the students and faculty present. He identified 3 figures at the back: Tamura Shigaraki, Kurogyari, and a bird-like beast, and concluded that they were likely the main assault force, with the others serving as hired foot soldiers. Shockwave assessed that he might need to intervene to restore balance to the situation. Back at USJ, after the villains emerged through the portal, Kurogyari observed that the only real heroes present were 13 and Eraserhead and found it perplexing that All Might was absent according to the schedule. Eraserhead noted that the villains had used the press as cover to infiltrate UA. Tamura expressed frustration at All Might's absence and suggested that drawing the symbol of peace out could be the goal of their attack, even if it meant harming students to provoke a response. Momo questioned why the alarms had not sounded, and 13 admitted that she did not know. Shoto speculated that one of the villains must have a quirk masking their presence and that the attackers had carefully chosen the isolated facility and timing of a class in session. He argued that, however foolish their trespass, the villains had thought this through and likely shared a common goal. Eraserhead instructed 13 to get the students out of the area and to alert the main campus. Aizawa suspected that if their sensors had been negated, their communications were likely jammed as well. He ordered Kaminari to try using his quirk to contact the school. Eraserhead leaped into the fray against the villains and immediately engaged. He quickly overpowered the first of the thugs who had tried to take him down. One of the villains warned the others that Eraserhead was a pro-hero who could cancel quirks by looking at them. A masked villain challenged whether such cancellation would work on their heteromorphic type. Aizawa acknowledged that might be true, then reminded them that a thug could only be dangerous if he could reach him, and he had trained to prevent that. He asked who was next. The villains stared in disbelief at Eraserhead. An unfamiliar voice then announced that the human children would be next if the heroes did not surrender. Aizawa turned and saw his worst nightmare as a teacher, his students kneeling with their hands behind their heads while a gargantuan winged robot and its cohorts held them at gunpoint. Aizawa demanded to know who the intruder was and ordered him to release the students. The intruder laughed and said that Aizawa was in no position to make demands, offering a conditional promise to spare the students if he surrendered. Aizawa noted to himself that the machine looked similar to the 6 who had already caused trouble for other heroes, and he decided to yield if it meant the students would be released. At that moment, one of the robot commanders gave an order to eliminate the students. The Decepticons trained their weapons and prepared to fire. The students looked up in fear, convinced their lives were about to end. Eraserhead was forced to stand and watch, seemingly helpless. Then a ground bridge opened and a purple craft tore through the sky at incredible speed, taking everyone by surprise. The craft transformed mid-flight, delivering a precise dropkick that sent Starscream skidding into the far wall. The pilot produced stun batons and used them to strike a Decepticon, knocking it away from the students and sending it tumbling backward. The remaining Decepticons tried to fire, but electrical tendrils disabled their systems and left them inert and sparking, scattering debris across the ground. The students and 13 recoiled at the imposing figure at the center of the rescue, Shockwave, towering in his Cybertronian form with a single red optic and dark purple armor bearing a faint green symbol on his chestplate. He took note of the frightened students and offered a brief, nonchalant comment as he moved toward the stairs. The villains recognized him and began to tremble. Villain operatives muttered that it was Shockwave, the feared vigilante. Shockwave landed in a burst of light, shrinking into a more compact Cybertronian mode and announcing that his reputation seemed to precede him. Aizawa demanded to know what Shockwave was doing here. Shockwave replied that he had come to eliminate the perpetrators and their underlings before they could harm anyone. One villain scoffed at the idea that Shockwave could take them all on, pointing out their numbers and dismissing the nearby students. Shockwave calmly countered by outlining the errors in their thinking. Their employers had not brought enough forces, some of the villains had failed to anticipate his arrival, and he would use all means at his command to stop anyone who continued the violence. He warned in a cold tone that he would not allow any of the children to be slain. Tamura noted that Shockwave was a large statement to make and said he had been planning to deal with Shockwave later, but he preferred to resolve both problems at once. Tamura issued a simple command to his forces to kill the robot and bring back his head. The villains charged Shockwave. He activated his left-hand touchvolt and moved with precise, overwhelming efficiency. What followed left Eraserhead, 13, and Class 1A shaken. Tesla attempted to electrocute Shockwave, but Shockwave used his touchvolt emitter to create a construct that absorbed and redirected the attack. Shockwave then pushed the construct forward with great speed, stunning Tesla and delivering a single disabling strike that knocked Tesla out of the fight. Needlehair and Marshall Hair attacked next, using their hair quirks as blades. Shockwave dodged and weaved between their strikes with calculated movements, looking for an opening. When they closed in together, Shockwave switched to a different tool and fired a precise shot set to incapacitate. The shot caught them off balance and left them unable to continue. The remaining Decepticons pressed their assault, but Shockwave continued to neutralize them with non-lethal, decisive actions that quickly turned the tide. Sparks and damaged machinery littered the area, but the fight never became gruesome. Shockwave focused on disabling foes and securing the students. Tamura watched the battlefield and signaled his frustration, but the immediate threat to the students had been removed. Aizawa and the other heroes moved to gather their students and assess the scene. Shockwave remained alert and prepared in case any remaining threats surfaced. There was a brief, tense aftermath as everyone caught their breath. A short pause filled the gap while the heroes organized their next steps. A chain shot struck 2 female combatants, overwhelming them and sending them collapsing while they screamed. Shockwave then used his hyperflux cannon to incapacitate them completely. Above, the students began hyperventilating, vomiting, and losing their composure. 13 cried openly at the massacre unfolding before them. Eraserhead felt the strain inside but managed to hold himself together, thinking that things had really gotten out of hand. Denki came up with a plan and instructed Tenya to gather reinforcements immediately, to tell them to get to the USJ and report that villains had breached the facility and that a purple, one-eyed killing machine was laying waste to the place. Tenya agreed, hoping the pros could do something about him. Tenya then used his engine quirk to rush off and gather the staff. Meanwhile, Shockwave engaged the villains. He fired sticky explosive rounds that disabled Victor's gun hands. Victor taunted Shockwave over his choice, and Shockwave replied that they would have to disagree. Shockwave then activated a device that rendered Victor's mechanical arms useless. Victor screamed as an electric saw construct struck him, leaving him incapacitated. Eraserhead retreated to his students to comfort them. He knew he was no match for Shockwave and that his presence among them was needed. Ochaka rocked herself, repeating to herself that this couldn't be happening. Shoto's calm evaporated as he looked at the carnage and wondered how anyone could be so cruel. Mineta fainted from the shock. Momo watched and cried uncontrollably. Tsuyu frantically demanded to know why Mr. Aizawa was not using his quirk. Aizawa explained that he had tried multiple times with no effect and that even his capturing weapon would barely phase this enemy. He said they could only hope Tenya returned with the pros in force and that, until then, they had little choice but to wait. Shockwave then faced 3 heavy hitters: Muscle Man, Steel Bulwark, and Minotaurus. He tried to punch Steel, who dodged and countered, sending Shockwave reeling. Muscle Man joined in, landing heavy blows, and Minotaurus followed with a strong kick. Shockwave lay battered for a moment, then rose and reassessed the situation. He decided brute strength was not the answer and opted for a different tactic. Spotting debris scattered around, Shockwave summoned his Techvolt emitters and used the fragments as improvised projectiles. The debris struck the villains and staggered them, giving Shockwave the opening he needed. He then arranged more pieces and unleashed a focused and powerful thunder blast that overwhelmed the trio, neutralizing them. 3 more villains, Hardhead, Sickleclaw, and Stitch Giant, charged with renewed fury. Hardhead tried to grab Shockwave, but Shockwave proved agile and used his stun batons to shock Hardhead into releasing his hold, leaving him out of commission. Sickleclaw attempted a slicing attack but was sent tumbling into the water simulator, where Shockwave followed up and stunned him, rendering him unable to continue. Stitched Giant lunged with ferocity, but Shockwave struck precise points and used a combination of gadgets to incapacitate the attacker. Shockwave finished the confrontation with a decisive maneuver, neutralizing the threat. When it was over, at least 10 villains lay neutralized. The remaining villains looked on in stunned horror as Shockwave stood amid the aftermath with his purple armor streaked from the fight. Shockwave challenged Tamura, asking whether he truly wanted to continue the game. Before Tamura could respond, Tenya returned with professional heroes. They were met with a scene of devastation. American pro heroes Stars and Stripes and Elephant arrived, as did Concert of Russia. All Might stood at the center, his smile gone as he took in the scene. Tenya announced that he had brought reinforcements. Denki expressed relief and urged them to see how Shockwave would handle the situation. The heroes descended, finding Shockwave positioned between the gathered heroes and the villains. All Might ordered the villains to surrender and warned that force would be used if they did not. Tamura mocked All Might, accusing him of hypocrisy. Shockwave countered that Tamura's threats against children made him a true villain and challenged who was truly in the wrong. Shockwave then readied his hyperflux cannon and trained it on Tamura, advising surrender. Tamura replied that he had brought new like-minded allies who wanted to speak with them. Tamura confirmed that Nomu had been designed specifically for All Might. He nodded to Kurogyri, who returned the acknowledgement. Kurogyri opened a larger portal and 6 more Decepticons stepped through, and the heroes were shocked to see the construct icons among them. Endeavor asked how they had arrived. Mixmaster said it did not matter and that their main target was Shockwave, their biggest score to settle, and that the heroes had their own problems. Tamura ordered 6 of the Decepticons to take on Shockwave while the rest handled the heroes. Shockwave glowed and transformed into his 8-meter form, brandishing his Techvolt emitters and announcing his intent to send the 6 to the Allspark. The scene cut. Shockwave braced to face the Constructicons. Hook demanded last words from the traitor Decepticon, but Shockwave dismissed it as pointless. The humans watched the standoff with dread. Bonecrusher opened his blaster and fired. Shockwave dodged and slammed an electrical shockwave into the ground, but the Constructicons leapt clear and 5 of them opened fire with blasters. Shockwave swapped his left Techvolt for a Hyperflux cannon, raised a shield with the right Techvolt, and returned fire with the Hyperflux. Tamura taunted the heroes about All Might's arrival, suggesting the encounter would be more entertaining with more heroes present. All Might confirmed that Tamura had targeted him and the students and asked whether Shockwave had been brought to kill them. Tamura replied that Shockwave had been an unexpected hidden boss and not the main goal of the day. He introduced Nomu as a being made to crush them like low-level opponents and ordered Nomu to defeat the heroes and bring All Might to him. Nomu charged, and the heroes prepared for the fight of their lives. Against the Constructicons, Shockwave landed a heavy blow on Mixmaster, who staggered before swinging in return. Shockwave created an electrical construct fist to push Mixmaster back further. Hook struck Shockwave from the left and sent him skidding back 10 meters. Shockwave recovered and fired his Hyperflux at Hook, who dodged and used his crane to hurl chunks of debris. Shockwave shot them down but then sensed Starscream stirring and adjusted, redirecting 2 of Hook's flying pieces at Starscream, who was hit hard, staggered, but rose angrily and joined the Constructicons against Shockwave. The heroes were breathing heavily after several minutes against Nomu. Tamura mocked them, asking if Nomu's difficulty was too great and suggesting he might switch games if Shockwave proved stronger than they were. Endeavor acknowledged that Nomu was more powerful than he had expected but resolved to push through to apprehend Shockwave. He challenged Tamura to intervene directly, calling him a coward for staying back. Tamura replied that the game was only fun when he was winning. Shockwave held his ground despite being surrounded. Starscream fired from his forearm blasters, and Shockwave summoned a Techvolt shield to block the shots before firing his Hyperflux as Starscream evaded. Starscream accused Shockwave of treachery and insisted traitors must be silenced. Shockwave countered by pointing out Starscream's own betrayals and ego, arguing that the Decepticons had been disbanded and some had chosen to live in peace rather than continue the war, while Starscream's arrogance would only bring ruin. Bonecrusher, Scrapper, and Long Haul attempted a pincer move, but Shockwave leaped aside at the last second and the 3 collided with one another. Shockwave landed 10 meters away and lectured Starscream about his schemes, arrogance, and incompetence. In response, Starscream ordered the Constructicons to merge into Devastator and take Shockwave out. The Constructicons obliged, and Devastator returned to the fray. Momo Yaoyorozu observed Nomu from a distance with makeshift binoculars and realized that Nomu functioned like a walking tank, likely combining shock absorption and regeneration quirks. She prepared communication earpieces and instructed Achiko to place them into the ears of the professional heroes, noting that the pros might need help to neutralize the walking tank before it caused more collateral damage. Achiko complied, and Momo began coordinating a plan to overwhelm Nomu so it could not rely on its absorption ability. That was where the situation stood as both sides braced for the next exchange. A teammate instructed Concert to sing a lullaby to lower the Nomu's concentration and defenses. Concert nodded and began the lullaby, and the Nomu grew sluggish as its focus faded. All Might and Endeavor charged in with coordinated, powerful strikes that brought the Nomu down unconscious. Tamura accused the heroes of cheating. All Might explained that they had received information about the Nomu's quirks and had taken it down through teamwork. Kurogiri attempted to use his Warp Gate quirk, but Bakugo managed to get the upper hand, seizing the collar at Kurogiri's neck and pinning him down. Tamura demanded to know how Kurogiri had been bested. Bakugo asserted that Kurogiri's smoky form still depended on a body and the collar proved it, so a well-placed physical attack could disrupt him. When Kurogiri tried to rise, Bakugo produced a controlled explosion that forced Kurogiri to groan and stay down. Bakugo warned that any further moves would be met with overwhelming force. The villains found themselves surrounded on all sides, with Bakugo holding Kurogiri. All might called for surrender, and the human villains chose to surrender rather than risk a worse fate. Only Tamura and Kurogiri remained to be dealt with. Endeavor demanded their surrender as well. Tamura announced that he had one move left, tapped his earpiece, and opened a space bridge. 5 more Decepticons stepped through the portal: Quake, Demolisher, Move, Ramjet, and Dirge. The heroes and Class 1A took a few steps back at the sight of the reinforcements. Tamura challenged them to see how they fared against a team of trained soldiers. The episode ended. Quake warned the warden not to get in the way. The heroes stared in shock at how dangerous the Decepticon criminals had become. The warden said he would ask them to surrender, but he already knew the answer. Quake agreed with him. Quake lifted his right foot and stomped the ground, creating a tremor that split the terrain in front of him. The sudden attack knocked the Autobots and heroes off their feet. Demolisher seized the opportunity and fired his missile launchers at the heroes and students, sending them tumbling. Everyone landed roughly, and it was nearly a miracle the humans were not crushed by the towering Autobots. The warden rallied his troops, ordering them to stand their ground and take the enemy down. The Autobots opened fire on the Decepticons. Demolisher reloaded and fired again, but this time the heroes managed to dodge and quickly regroup. The pros and students took cover as beam and projectile fire filled the air. Endeavor noted that the situation was going nowhere and insisted they needed to find a way to turn the tide. At that moment, small spider-like drones with shockwave-like chests crept into view, taking a stealthy approach. The Decepticons paused their banter, and Quake taunted the defenders while Move mocked their aim. Suddenly the drones opened fire with distracting laser bursts that were more annoying than damaging. Demolisher demanded to know where the fire was coming from. The heroes and Autobots looked up. Momo pointed out the attackers in the sky. The drones sprinted forward like a coordinated swarm and then transformed into weapons that clamped onto the humans. Bakugo received a launcher-like device and grinned as he took aim. He fired 5 shots at an optimal angle. 3 found their marks among the Decepticons, exploding and scattering smaller charges that disrupted the enemy formation and forced them to break their lines. Quake re-emerged furious and shouted that the Autobots and humans would die screaming. He focused energy into his fist to produce a powerful quake, but Todoroki intervened. Todoroki fired an ice shot that froze Quake's right arm solid, then followed with a heat blast that rendered the arm irreparably damaged and caused it to fall away. Quake screamed in pain as his power faltered. Todoroki explained that exposing metal to extreme elements too suddenly could crack and warp it. Quake regained his composure and ordered his forces to ignore the Autobots and target the humans instead. Dirge cloaked and slipped to the rear to create chaos. He targeted Minoru with hallucination effects that briefly disoriented him. Momo noticed Minoru drifting and struck him with the flat of her rifle to snap him out. He collapsed, unconscious. Momo scolded him angrily for losing focus at such a critical moment. Using her new burst carbine scanner, Momo activated an X-ray function and detected Dirge hiding among the debris. She fired and disabled his stealth cloak, forcing him into the open. Dirge transformed into jet mode and unleashed a torrent of fire toward the humans, but Ochako countered with a gravity pulse that sent him careening backward. Dirge fought to correct his descent but crashed into the water simulation, and Sickleclaw was flung toward the mountain simulation by the resulting shockwave. Above the battlefield, Shockwave and Starscream clashed in a tense dogfight. Starscream, the superior aerial combatant, landed a few hits and launched missiles, but Shockwave transformed mid-flight and used his systems to destroy the incoming ordnance. Shockwave grappled Starscream and delivered a thunderblast that stunned him briefly. Shockwave attempted to follow with a hyperflux cannon, but Starscream recovered faster, transformed, and struck Shockwave with a null ray that sent him tumbling down into a giant crater. Starscream landed, smirking like a predator, and strode to the crater expecting a prize, but when the smoke cleared the purple, one-eyed vigilante was gone. In his place lay a young boy, appearing around 14 years old. Starscream was stunned into fury at the discovery that their enigmatic adversary was still a child. The battlefield fell into a sudden hush as humans and Cybertronians alike stopped to take in the sight. The gathered crowd reacted with disbelief and shock at who Shockwave had been revealed to be. Bakugo, standing at the center, recognized the boy and wondered to himself if it could be Deku. Izuku Midoriya lay unconscious in the crater he had created on impact. Humans and Cybertronians surrounded him as if witnessing something extraordinary. The warden muttered that this was something else entirely and questioned whether this was truly the Shockwave they had been looking for. All Might, like the other humans, was overwhelmed and mortified at the sight of a boy so young bearing the vigilante's mantle, and he wondered aloud how someone so young could have turned out this way. He should be in school getting good grades, not taking lives simply because he could justify his actions. Starscream suspected that the human who had caused him so much trouble might actually be Shockwave and refused to believe such an insignificant worm could be responsible for everything. Class 1A struggled to process what they were seeing. Bakugo, on the other hand, was torn between disbelief and fury. He could not reconcile how someone classified as quirkless had become a lean, lethal force capable of bringing down the sludge villain where Bakugo's best efforts had barely made a dent. Izuku groaned, regained consciousness, slowly rose, and took in the many faces around him, ranging from shock to outright disbelief. He made them all aware that they should be surprised and pointed out that they had been bested by someone they might call a brat. He reminded them that he had thwarted Starscream's plan to subjugate the planet by destroying the space bridge. Bakugo burst in from the right and grabbed Deku by the shirt, demanding to know why someone classified quirkless was now leaving devastation in his wake and what he had been hiding all this time. Izuku struck Bakugo across the face, then shoved him back, sending Bakugo sprawling to the floor. Izuku explained that he had been labeled quirkless and that what he possessed was not what anyone would call a quirk. He said he was no longer fully human. He identified himself as techno-organic, possibly the first techno-organic being to travel the cosmos. Bakugo asked incredulously whether there was more out there than just them and the alien robots. Izuku answered that there were many kinds of beings, mortals relative to their species on their planets, and then there were godlike, cosmic entities that would dwarf even the greatest villains. Titans and embodiments of concepts existed on a different scale entirely. Everyone listened intently, even Starscream fell silent. Bakugo demanded proof. Izuku told them about Gaia. He said that Primus and Unicron were not the only entities connected to the Cybertronians. Before Primus and Unicron were known, there had been a being who embodied reason and balance named Gaia. For eons, Gaia had served as an equalizer, maintaining equilibrium throughout the universe while her brothers Primus and Unicron left destruction in their wake. She was the one who stepped in when their quarrels threatened everything. Eventually the brothers left after repeated clashes and Gaia fell silent for a time. Izuku added that this was the first sign of her return. Endeavor voiced his skepticism, questioning the idea that Gaia could make humans related to the Cybertronians. Izuku countered by explaining that Gaia was not only the world they walked on but also the source of quirks around the world. Humans were her progeny, and quirks were her creation. To explain how he acquired his own abilities, Izuku turned the clock back a decade. He recounted that at 4 years old he had been diagnosed quirkless, and his life had taken a darker turn. Friends had drifted and turned against one another as some gained quirks and others did not. After being hurt by Katsuki, he had fled into the woods and wondered why he had been left out, why the divide between those who had and those who had not seemed to grow ever wider. He wanted to become a hero people could admire, but his circumstances offered no clear path. His thoughts were interrupted when a blazing object fell from the sky. He ducked for cover and, once it was safe, discovered that it was not a meteor but a crashed spacecraft. The pilot had been forced down after a skirmish with an enemy warship. Against his better judgment, he entered the wreck and found Shockwave inside. Shockwave had been documenting quirks and the social divisions they caused. They spoke, and as time ran out, Shockwave offered a solution. A machine that could give him the power to become the hero he dreamed of. Izuku volunteered for the experiment. It was agonizing at first, but then strength replaced the pain. When enemies arrived, Shockwave stayed behind and set the ship to self-destruct so Izuku could escape, leaving a deep crater where the vessel had fallen. With his newfound strength, Izuku planned to become the hero he had always wanted. For the next 10 years, he maintained a facade of his old life to keep others in the dark until now. His confession landed on the humans like a meteor to the face. Izuku turned back to the Cybertronians and told them that they were no different from Primus and Unicron or from the heroes and villains housed in the facility. They saw the world in black and white, good versus evil, but he saw things in shades of gray. Izuku told them that it might not have crossed their minds and asked if they wanted to know how the war on Cybertron that lasted for eons had come to a halt. The warden asked what he meant. Izuku explained that the Autobots did not necessarily win after Megatron's defeat. The war ended because Megatron himself disbanded the Decepticons after Optimus Prime freed him from Unicron's sway. Megatron realized what oppression felt like and went into self-imposed exile. Izuku added that he had some information to back up the claim. Izuku transformed into Shockwave at full height and played a recording. When the recording finished, the Autobots and Decepticons were at a loss. Demolisher reacted in disbelief. The warden asked how things could get any crazier. Shockwave Izuku in Shockwave's form said he had a final recording from his predecessor intended in case Megatron ever encountered him. The recording began. Shockwave's predecessor addressed Megatron, explaining that he had become one with the Allspark along with comrades lost in the Great War. He admitted disappointment over Megatron's exile and described how, while remaining on Cybertron after the war, he had come to see the true colors and motives of former comrades whose mentality and integrity were questionable. He warned that with Megatron gone, the Decepticons had splintered into 4 factions. Those like Steeljaw striking out on their own to pursue their own agendas. Those like Starscream actively seeking vengeance against Megatron. Cyclonus and his team, who had infiltrated Cybertron posing as the High Council with plans to bring Megatron back and steer Cybertron toward Decepticon control. And those who simply wished to live out their cycles in peace, who were now seen as traitors and would be dealt with harshly. He advised strongly against trying to reason with the first 3 types and signed off, wishing Megatron farewell. The log ended with the old Shockwave's final words. When the log finished, Shockwave reverted to Izuku and the assembled crowd reacted with a mixture of shock and elation. The warden realized that the High Council that had taken over after the war and labeled Optimus Prime and his followers as criminals might actually be Decepticons seeking control of Cybertron. Izuku confirmed the suspicion. The warden admitted he had suspected something was wrong and now saw the problem was worse than he had thought. Izuku turned his attention to Starscream. He blamed Starscream for the deaths of many Decepticons who defected after the war and for costing him someone he had considered like family, someone cold and calculating but whom Izuku had viewed as a brother or father figure because they shared the same CNA. He held Starscream responsible for refusing to move on. Izuku transformed back into Shockwave. His optic glowed an unusual red as fury flared. He armed his hyperflux cannons and issued a fierce threat that he intended to bring Starscream to justice. A tense standoff followed. Shockwave, in his berserk state, spoke with both his human and Shockwave voices, declaring he would avenge his predecessor if it was the last thing he did. The declaration made many present visibly alarmed, including Quake. Devastator stepped forward, reminding Shockwave that they still had unfinished business and warning him not to rely on past tricks. Shockwave replied that he had held back before, but that would not be the case now, and he would defend his home. Shockwave activated the siege pack. The pack separated into components and latched onto him, enhancing his frame. Standing taller and fully upgraded, Shockwave faced Devastator with cold resolve and prepared for battle. Starscream ordered the attack. Devastator fired his blaster, but Shockwave absorbed the barrage without faltering. Shockwave formed a double hyperflux cannon with his left arm and sent Devastator tumbling across the training terrain before he struck a simulated rock and fell back. Starscream tried to exploit the distraction with his null ray. The beam pushed Shockwave, but Shockwave generated a shield that stopped the ray. Starscream increased the assault with both beams. Shockwave used the shield as a ram to shove Starscream aside and then struck him, sending Starscream skidding backward. Devastator recovered and lunged to kick Shockwave, but Shockwave brought all four of his arms together to form a defensive shell and then struck Devastator, forcing him back. All Might observed that Shockwave was far stronger than they had anticipated, which explained why they had failed to apprehend him earlier. He also reflected aloud about a deeper question. If Shockwave's account was true, where did they truly come from? In the background, Tamura watched and pondered. Having already seen Shockwave revealed to be a human without quirks beneath the armor quickly and decisively defeat some of the attackers who had come for Class 1A, Tamura noted that the pro-heroes had arrived and persuaded other assailants to surrender rather than face severe retribution. Now Tamura, Kurogiri, and 5 Decepticon allies watched Shockwave trade blows with a revenge-driven Starscream and a dangerous Devastator. Tamura considered what moves he still had available, and his attention fell to a small vial he had received from Starscream. Flashback: Starscream had given Tamura a strange glowing purple stone as part of their agreement with the League of Villains. Starscream had warned that the stone held power beyond comprehension, capable of shaking the foundations of Tamura's world, and advised careful use. Back in the present, the battle between Shockwave, Starscream, and Devastator continued to rage across the simulation as everyone watched, the lines between friend and foe growing increasingly uncertain. When the rock was inserted into a living host, it granted the power to command the dead. In an Unalive host, it drove everything around it toward destruction. The host's resolve determined how much control was available. On another world, this brand of energon distinct from the blue that ran through Tamura and his followers had been dangerous for humans to consume by themselves. Here, for those with quirks, it could latch onto those powers and possibly amplify them. Its effects were unpredictable and always destructive. Tamura reached into his pocket, pulled out the rock, and without hesitation slammed it into the chest of the Nomu. The veins along the creature turned purple and it snapped awake with a corrupt vigor, drawing the attention of the heroes and the Cybertronians. The Warden demanded to know what Tamura was doing. Tamura answered that it was a final move, a final attempt at the game. He ordered the Nomu to use its newfound strength to crush them. Instead, the Nomu did something unexpected. Horns erupted from its head and wing-like spines unfurled across its back. It struck at Tamura, then in an unfamiliar voice declared that it belonged to no one and proclaimed itself chaos. A deeper voice answered, revealing itself as Unicron. The Cybertronians froze in shock at the name. Shockwave entered the fray and took on a humanoid shape. He accused Tamura of being a fool and asked if he knew what he had done. Tamura protested that this had not been part of the plan and blamed Starscream. Shockwave replied that Tamura had used dark energon on his so-called Nomu and inadvertently let Unicron into their realm. Unicron introduced himself as a bringer of destruction and declared his intent to destroy the planet and its people, beginning with those present. Shockwave interrupted and said there was someone who wished to speak to Unicron. He glanced at the emblem on his chest plate. It flared, green fire surrounding him. His armor darkened, his head took on Izuku's shape with a metallic sheen, and his eyes glowed green with blue corneas. Gaia spoke through Izuku. Gaia addressed Unicron as a brother and reminded him of the millennia since they had last met. She said she had heard that he had nearly killed his own sibling and had attempted to reawaken on another Earth, threatening its human population simply for existing. She asked whether he had learned nothing. Unicron dismissed her, insisting that he was the embodiment of chaos. Gaia replied that he had overstepped his boundaries by threatening the world she allowed to form and the humans she had shaped. She reminded him that she maintained balance and that she would not allow his actions to continue. Gaia and Unicron clashed at incomprehensible speed, moving too fast for even All Might to follow. Their battle erupted out of the USJ and tore through the city. The clash sent shockwaves through streets and buildings, blasts struck bystanders and sent debris flying, causing injuries and casualties among those in the area. Gaia struck back and sent Unicron tumbling into the ocean, generating a massive wave that surged toward Mizudafu and forced evacuations of the city, including professional heroes and UA Academy personnel. Unicron re-emerged and their combat sent another colossal wave across the sea. Gaia dodged and countered, striking the Nomu in a way that made Unicron falter. The two gods exchanged blows that flung them into the exosphere, yet their energies remained palpable to everyone below. People across the world felt the tremors of the battle, and crowds watched as the two titans fought across the sky. Izuku, speaking through the vessel of Gaia, questioned Unicron. He asked whether Unicron had ever considered where he would be without a reason to destroy. Unicron insisted that he was not obsessed with destruction, he was destruction itself. Izuku argued that without Primus there would be no purpose for Unicron. Primus creations and Gaia's balance gave existence its meaning. Without balance, Izuku said, there was nothing. They grappled. Izuku locked with Unicron in a furious exchange, using headbutts and knees to unbalance the colossal being. Unicron slammed Izuku and dragged him back down toward Earth. The fight returned to Muzudafu as the city continued its evacuation. Mirko used her strength to lift rubble and free trapped civilians when the Titans crashed through the street below, Unicron driving the Nomu to hammer at Izuku. Each impact sent shockwaves through the city and threatened to worsen the already dire situation. Izuku seized Unicron's fists and delivered a powerful kick to his solar plexus, sending him tumbling down another road. Unicron chose to escalate and ascended into the air, gathering a sphere of dark energon between his palms. Izuku engaged his siege mode and fired all 4 hyperflux cannons at Unicron in a concentrated green beam. The two energies collided, each holding its ground. Izuku then activated his final contingency. He engaged the siege pack and commanded the Requiem blaster. The siege pack separated from Izuku and formed into a large blaster, its handles readied above the weapon. Izuku gripped the weapon and aimed at the dark energon beam that threatened to destroy not just him but everything around him. He squeezed the trigger, releasing a blast greater and faster than all the hyperflux cannons combined. The Requiem beam tore through the dark energon like a storm through fog and struck Unicron, forcing the giant to cry out in pain. The Nomo form Unicron had been using evaporated into nothing, leaving no trace of the Nomu or dark energon behind. Sparks ran along the Requiem blaster before it suddenly fell apart. Izuku took a long look at the devastated city and sighed. He recognized that much of the destruction had been inevitable in the course of the battle. He flew up to the upper limits of the city, stretched out his right hand, and called for restoration. A healing light flowed from him and swept over Muzudafu. Buildings began to knit themselves back together and the wounded started to recover. In the UA infirmary, Midnight and Milady felt the green light wash over them. Their injuries healed rapidly and they regained consciousness. They saw the light enveloping the city and moved to look outside, where Izuku was pouring every scrap of energy into rebuilding Muzudafu. Elsewhere, pros, students, Autobots, and Decepticons watched the city mend itself. Quake looked down at his missing arm and found it regenerating. He smiled as it was restored. All Might admitted that he now believed everything the boy had once said. Inko, working in the evacuation effort, saw her son restoring the city and felt a swell of relief. After a short while the work was done. Unicron had been defeated, the Nomu eradicated, and balance returned. Smiling, Izuku descended to the street where people had gathered. His mother rushed forward and hugged him with an intensity that left him shaken. All Might made his way through the crowd. Izuku acknowledged that the threat had been ended and then announced his surrender. All Might replied that they could work something out and that there was much to discuss. Izuku concurred. Some time later, Izuku entered a meeting room surrounded by UA staff and faculty and members of the HPSC. He used his bugs to project a screen and prefaced the session by emphasizing 3 points. He still operated, by most accounts, as a vigilante. The appearance of quirks was not what they believed it to be, and what he was about to present would seem unbelievable at first, but he assured them it was the absolute truth. Aboard Starscream's warship, Starscream cursed the human who had ruined his plans and allowed humans to quickly defeat the 5 he had brought in for support. With those allies and the Constructicons apprehended, he decided there was nothing left to gain here. He grinned with cruel ambition and engaged the warship's hyperdrive. In an empty void, Unicron seethed. He had learned that his sister Gaia was still alive and had a prime of her own, a champion that annoyed him. Trapped inside the container that once held the Allspark, Unicron accepted that the puny human had made things difficult. He resolved to send his own champion. He summoned Galvatron and his team and informed them that he had located Gaia and her herald and intended to eradicate them and their creations. Before Gaia herself could be destroyed, one adversary had to be eliminated, the human Izuku, shown to Galvatron in a dark, shockwave-like form. Galvatron pledged to do his best and cautioned that he might need to command the Legion if the target proved as powerful as described. Unicron answered that Galvatron's mission would reveal what further measures were required. Galvatron and his team stared into the void, intent on the task ahead. The narrator considered creating monthly subscriptions to offer the same services at reduced prices to increase versatility. They thought that, if demand proved high enough, it might be possible to make it happen. One team member suggested turning the novel into its own little anime adaptation. They noted that if the team did it correctly, it could succeed where Galvatron's revenge had failed so miserably. They encouraged everyone to press the vote button. The protagonist hesitated, torn over whether to follow through with the proposal. For a moment they resolved to go ahead. Moments later, they convinced themselves not to proceed. A brief pause followed as they gathered their thoughts.